This is our second show in a 5-part series which delves into the issues related to BC's expanding energy sector. Hi, I'm Fanny Kiefer. Today we're in Fort St. John. It's a community which has experienced extensive growth, much of it due to energy expansion. In this show, we look at the pros, cons, and concerns that surround hydraulic fracturing and its role in natural gas production. We'll also talk job potential in the piece, what skills are needed to work in the energy field, and we'll hear from workers, landowners, and environmentalists too, as we strive to find a balance. Fort St. John boasts several post-secondary facilities. One is Northern Lights College, where our panel has gathered today. Before we go inside to meet the group, let's set the scene for one of the topics we'll be exploring, hydraulic fracturing.
Hydraulic fracturing is a process of pumping water, sand, and a small amount of additives down the wellbore at a high rate and pressure to crack the rock open so that the natural gas can then flow back through these fractures to the wellbore. In a cubic meter of water, which is our standard measurement, 1,000 liters, we measure additives in and sand in. That's made up about 99.5% of sand and water, and the other 0.5% is additives found in common household use like soap, bleaches, things that you use in household cleaners, things that you make jello, things that you make ice cream out of. Those are the type of additives that go in a frac fluid. An average frac job uses maybe 800 cubic meters of water. To put in perspective, a dairy truck holds about 16 cubic meters of water. So if there's 50 dairy trucks going down the road, that would be about the amount of water used on a typical frac job in the shale gas. All this water is flowed back, recycled, retested, reused. On an average project where we have multiple wells, approximately 60 to 70% of the water is actually recycled. So when we talk about 800 cubic meters, that's initial frac, and we get much of that back and keep reusing it and recycling it through the whole process. And it's often even that operators will share frac water before they dispose of it at the end of a project.
We're inside the oil and gas lab with a grand group of 5 prepared to discuss the energy issues at hand. And with me today is Lori Rancour. She is president and CEO of Northern Lights College. We have Tyler Bryant. He's an energy policy analyst with the David Suzuki Foundation. Lori Ackerman is here. She is the mayor of Fort St. John and a longtime resident of the Peace region. Kevin Heffernan is with us. He's a geologist and he's president of the Canadian Society of Unconventional Resources. Ermi Critcher is a farmer and she's a director on the board of the BC Grain Producers Association. And we're pleased to welcome Lisa Edwards. She's a graphic recorder from Victoria who will be mapping our discussion today. Sometimes people on opposing sides of an issue can't agree to words, but they can agree to pictures. We'll reveal the drawing a little later in the program, and now let's get started. Kevin, what's the difference between a conventional well and a shale gas well?
So a conventional well, gas or gas will flow to the surface just because of the pressure that exists in the reservoir. A shale well requires pathways to be created within the rock in order for gas to move to the well, and that's done with hydraulic fracturing.
Why is shale gas fracturing so popular today? What's different?
What's different really is the technology and the way the technology has evolved over the last 50 or 60 years. Today, we can use hydraulic fracturing operations in horizontal wells, sometimes very long horizontal wells, and that allows a much greater exposure of the well to the reservoir and higher production rates.
And from an industry perspective, how safe is it? How secure is it?
Hydraulic fracturing is in fact a very safe operation. There are concerns that have been expressed about groundwater contamination associated with hydraulic fracturing operations. But in fact, every regulator in North America has said there may be issues with oil and gas development, but the issues are not related to hydraulic fracturing.
Tyler, over to you.
Well, I think the jury is still very much out on whether it's safe or not, both from an environmental and health perspective. The problem with shale is that we simply don't have the data points or the baselines, for example, to really understand what the impacts of it are. Because we've really only been producing it in a large scale, say in the United States, for the past 10 years, we just don't have the observations to know how this is actually affecting our groundwater sources and our other environmental indicators. So I think right now it's too early to say that it's safe.
And your concerns about groundwater are contamination, what?
Well, there's a lot of concerns. I don't really know where to begin, but the one is that shale does require an incredible amount of water. Per well, you're looking at anywhere between 15 and 60 million liters of water. And a well pad typically consists of 4 to 16 individual wells. So you can see already just how much water a well pad would need. The other problem with shale is that it has a very fast die-off of the well productivity rate. So it'll be producing very, very well in the first year. Then it'll die off to about 50% of its production in the second year, excuse me, and then 25% of its production in the third year. So the problem is that you have to keep drilling wells to maintain production. It's not like a nice conventional well where you pick a pin in the balloon and it just comes out ad infinitum. It really requires you to keep popping the bubble wrap to release that gas. And so over the course to produce a lot of natural gas from shale requires a lot of water and a lot of industrial activity on a landscape.
And the water recycled or not? Do you use the same water? Do you use fresh water all the time? How does that work?
So a couple of things. Industry is working very, very hard to reduce the amount of water that is used, both initially and through processes like recycling, reuse recycling, and by looking to other water sources as well, deep salty water that would serve no other
I see,
no
so
other
like saline
purpose.
water.
Saline water, exactly.
Ermi, go ahead.
Sorry, I agree with you, Kevin, excuse me. But one of the problems with shale is that it creates a lot of produced water, which is water that's deep, deep, deep underground. It's highly saline, about 6 or 7 times the salt content, say, of ocean water, and it comes up to the surface. And a lot of the water sure is injected back, but it's not all of the water. 50 to 70% of the water is put back. So we still have a lot of produced water. And not only that, but chemically treated water that is used in the frac fluid that contains a significant amount of chemicals and known dangerous elements to humans that are either injected back into the well or have to be dealt with in some way or treated with in some way. And so when we transport that or we put it in a dugout, it's kind of there on the landscape and we don't have a really solid way to deal with it.
Okay, so frac additives, a thing we'll talk about in a minute. But Ermi, over to you. The grain farmers in your area, your neighbors, what do they think about this, about hydraulic fracturing?
In our area, there's quite a bit of activity because there's quite a bit of fracking going on right now. There's a huge development there because of that. The Montney field basically goes through our farmland and the neighboring farms there. It isn't just the fracking itself, it's all the industrial activity which goes with the fracking, basically. There is a lot of, by the time you develop a lease, by the time you drill and get to the fracking part of it, there's already a huge impact in the rural area.
And this sounds like a silly question, but do people knock on your doors or companies knock on your doors and say, hello, we think there's natural gas on your land, can we drill, or how does it work?
It usually, actually there's a lot of work has been done on that already. It used to be that you have the landsman knock on your door and say, this company is gonna drill on your land there, and basically say, this is what we're gonna do and this is how much we're gonna pay. And there's been a bit of a shift now because a lot of landowners complained about that. So there is a landowner notification process happening now where actually when the mineral rights get sold, they notify you, and you can at that point go and say, well, listen, this isn't a very good spot to put this because we have plans with that land or so on. But whether it has any teeth and whether it's going anywhere, we don't know, but at least you have an initial interference where you can go and state your concern.
Okay, and I'm sure as mayor, you get complaints and you get praise at City Hall about all of this.
Yes, actually, as a director on the regional district as well that looks after the rural area, we do, and we have actually supported a farmer's advocate office for that reason. And we believe that that particular farmer's advocate has been able to iron out some of the issues that are happening with our landowners.
Right, because private land, public land, you don't own those rights, right?
No.
Okay. Regulations the same for the hydraulic fracturing in the States as they are in Canada?
Our regulations vary. I think of North America as having 40 different regulatory frameworks. We're fortunate in Western Canada, both Alberta and British Columbia, in fact, have very, very progressive, rigorous regulatory environments. And I want to go back to something that Tyler said. He said, you know, there's lots of salt water produced, and that is correct. But he made the comment that, you know, 30% of it is, you know, just stored in, you know, dugouts on the surface. That's actually not correct. In both, well, in all three of the Western provinces, the management and handling and management and disposal of that salt water that's produced is very, very rigorously regulated. So
the water's regulated. What about the chemicals, the chemical waste? What happens to that?
So the chemical flow back, or the hydraulic fracturing fluids that flow back as a part of that produced water, in fact, are treated exactly the same way that salt water that's produced is treated. And in Alberta and British Columbia, it's disposed into deep wells in the subsurface. It's not stored in dugouts on the surface.
Okay, and concerns about that, Tyler? Environmental concerns?
Well, I mean, I think it's a stretch to say that we have an excellent regulatory regime here in the province. The Water Act is aging, and it was not written to accommodate the water needs of the oil and gas development activities in the northeast BC, or to really compensate for a lot of the shale gas development here. What's going on is that a lot of gas producers are applying for water withdrawals under what's called Section 8, which doesn't require them to actually get a water license. They can get a temporary permit. And almost all shale gas producers are resorting to use these, and it's a much less stringent and way to get water withdrawal licenses. The other issue is that oil and gas producers can simply acquire their water from bodies that are not regulated, such as the city of Dawson Creek, for example. They can just buy bulk water purchases that aren't covered, say, by the Oil and Gas Commission.
Okay, so something to pay attention to.
So these are major gaps in the regulations. And so I would say that the province of BC is looking to modernize the Water Act, but we really do not have a way to deal with the amount of water withdrawals right now with the specter of a huge booming shale industry.
Okay, and the mayor can have some influence on that, on modernizing the Water Act, perhaps not, but I know you have lots of opinion. And at this very college, you're training workers for oil and gas, and this last BC election was fought on jobs and the economy. What's happening here?
We're very busy, and it goes beyond this region. As a nation, we're facing a skills gap. We've got industries that are booming across the country in different areas, and an aging population. We're looking at retirements. There are studies that have been put out. One that's often quoted was put out by Rick Miner, who was a past college president, wrote a piece called "People Without Jobs and Jobs Without People." So, you know, I think that regardless of the controversy and where things may go, there has been an oil and gas industry in this area for decades, and there will continue to be an oil and gas industry, and they will continue to need workers. So we have to work to get particularly local people educated to access the jobs.
Okay, and as training develops, it obviously develops in a way that's responsible, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean,
well, and
when you get out, you actually get a job, and a permanent job, you hope, maybe 75,000 jobs if you believe the BC Jobs Plan.
Yes, and we're, as an educational institution, we need to remain plugged in to industry and to the labor market projections. That's key. I mean, and it always is a challenge, but we have, locally, we have a Northeast Regional Workforce Table, which is comprised of education representatives from the post-secondary and the school district level. We've got industry on that, different levels of community organizations, employment connections. It's that communication and staying up to date with where things are going that remains key. The industry linkages and the up-to-date discussions and maintaining those relationships are the only way that we're going to make sure we're adjusting to the needs as
And
they
we
evolve.
live in a changing world, as we all know. An effort to decarbonize, to not put so much carbon into the atmosphere, everybody agrees, I'm assuming here, that that's a good thing, and certainly as a farmer, steward of the land.
Yes, we are doing our part. I mean, most of our equipment is converted now to lower the emissions, and we are zero tilling now on our land to make less passes. We do best management practices on our farms. So yes, we are definitely part of that. We could be more part of the solution if we could plant basically crops which actually take carbon out and would get paid like in carbon credits.
Okay, is there such a thing as a natural gas tractor, perhaps? Not yet.
No biofuels.
Probably is.
Is there?
Yeah, and there is an emerging industry.
I would go biofuels.
One of the great success stories of the BC economy is Westport Innovations, which has made a natural gas powertrain for heavy-duty vehicles. And that can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of a regular heavy-duty fleet by about 20%. So, and Westport is one of the fastest growing companies in BC right now. So it goes to show that investing in carbon saving or cleaner technology actually is a pathway to job growth as well.
And what does it mean to this community?
Well, I think that, first of all, I don't know anyone who gets up in the morning and tries to figure out how they can screw up their child's life. And so we are all trying to leave a lighter footprint. And this particular industry is really plugged into the community. And we connect with our all of the producers here, as well as the transmission pipeline companies, et cetera. So they're all working towards being more efficient, effective, and leaving a lighter footprint. That's included in the training. It's brought in every different area. It's important to the community because it enables our small and medium-sized enterprises to take a look at what some of the issues are and find a way to be more efficient and effective. And I know several entrepreneurs in Fort St. John who have created intellectual property, and that creates wealth in the community. And it's really important to have that wealth generation in British Columbia. This is a resource that we need to take advantage of without diminishing our children's opportunities.
And balancing the environment and the economy, obviously.
I totally agree with that sentiment. I wish that industry would actually take that up, though. I mean, the largest carbon subsidy going on in this province right now is about $180 million to the natural gas processors and extractors for not having to pay for their fugitive emissions. So the Spectra energy plants are venting CO2 and methane that's stripped from the raw gas, and they don't have to pay a single dollar of carbon price for that, whereas all the rest of BCers, for any amount of fossil fuels that we consume or any amount of GHGs that we emit to the atmosphere, we have to pay for. So if the industry was really serious about reducing its carbon footprint, why is it not paying the carbon tax on its fugitive emissions?
Well, and if I could, I firmly believe that this is a conversation really that's been on the forefront of a lot of newspapers and media around the world. And we really do need to sink our teeth into it, but it's relatively new, really.
Sure, and we need public consultation and process and truth and all of that. Kevin, what rings a bell for you here?
Well, first of all, I agree with Mayor Ackerman. There's no question that the industry, I think, knows that there is a lot of carbon dioxide, for example, in some places being produced as a part of the process. But I think it's also fair to say that there's a lot of effort going into understanding, determining how best to deal with that. It's not a hidden issue. It's an issue that I think government and industry are grappling with.
In fact, though, the industry knows exactly how to deal with it. I mean, they've been sequestering acid gas in Alberta for 30, 35 years. It's essentially the same technology to take CO2 gas and reinsert it back into the wells. That's called carbon capture and storage. This technology is available, it's relatively cheap, and they can do it right now. The reason they're not is because they're not having to pay for the carbon emissions that they're currently just venting to the atmosphere for free.
So that's something to call the Premier about and talk about and do all of that. Does that concern You, Army?
Well, we as agriculture producers, which are in primary production, we are paying the carbon tax, and it's a huge hit for us in the agriculture sector. So when you see flaring going on right next door, and you know they don't have to go and pay for that, it seems minuscule what we are putting in the air, and yet we are paying the carbon tax. So yes, it is a concern for us, but other provinces have other formats of dealing with that. Like in Alberta, they have, is it the Carbon Trust Fund, where you can actually, you probably know more about that than I do, but they're using offsets, agricultural offsets, to offset some of it.
And energy policy can always be tweaked. Truly. I mean, we all know that, and it's a fact, and we need more skilled labor. That's a fact. We need to reduce the carbon. That's a fact, she says. And you need a community like Fort St. John in the Peace region to be fruitful and be able to build schools, hospitals, roads.
Absolutely.
We're a resource-based province.
We're a resource-based nation. I've always said, when your daddy opened his wallet to give you your allowance, if you followed the life of that dollar, it came from the resource industry in Canada. And I think that we need to take it upon ourselves, and every industry needs to revisit. I remember a couple decades ago when this province's forestry industry was hammered internationally for the forestry practices. And instead of running and hiding under a rock, we put our shoulders back and our chin up, and we said, no, that's our industry, and we're going to be the best jurisdiction we
are hewers
can.
of wood.
Absolutely.
But 20 years ago, the environmentalists had to wake up industry and had to wake up government, so there were changes in forest practices, and indeed, nothing is perfect, but it did come.
So we have the ability to do that again with an industry that's within our jurisdiction. And so we have different perspectives which really can bring it together, and I think it can be done.
What do you think that's about? The controversy,
So with apologies to Shaw and Global, a lot of it has to do with the way incidents in the United States have been reported in Canada. And a lot of those incidents have been tagged as being related to or a result of hydraulic fracturing. And they're not. They're really a function of basically the construction techniques that have been used, the regulatory environment that exists in some jurisdictions in the United States, and the way fluids in particular are managed on the surface.
Well, that's why this is so important, really.
Exactly. A responsible industry will address those, and I think we have that. We have responsible regulators.
And we as people who are not the geologists and the environmentalists and the policy analysts and the mayors and the farmers and the college presidents have to be able to inform ourselves enough so that we make the right decision. Study up, if you will. As we mentioned at the beginning of the program, Lisa, our graphic recorder, was going to map our conversation for discussion. So let's take a look and get discussing. As you look at this chart, what comes to mind?
So first of all, I think Lisa did a really good job with this. I hadn't appreciated sort of the spectrum of issues that we'd gone through when you're in the middle of the discussion. But there are a couple of things that jumped out at me when I looked at this. And the first is just a comment. One comment: production dies off quickly. Well, in fact, production from shale wells and the kinds of wells that are being developed here is expected to go on for decades. There is a rapid initial decline. The other observation was this big water droplet here, and a reference to a lot of chemicals. I don't know where that's coming from really. That's certainly a perception. Typically about 0.5% of the fluid is chemicals, and they're chemicals that are almost entirely used. They're under your kitchen sink. They're used at swimming pools and water treatment plants, or they're used in food production. So I think it was a comment from Tyler, and I'm just wondering sort of what he's getting at with that, lots of chemicals. It's also all, the chemical list's available publicly as well.
Yeah, the chemicals are available publicly, and I would encourage British Columbians to look it up at fracfocus.ca. But I do know that the fracking fluid does contain a considerable amount of chemicals, and provided that we account for them, we need to understand if they're safe. And a lot of those chemicals are acids, ammonium-based substances, substances to kill bacteria, antibiogenic chemicals, and that kind of thing to support the fracking operation. In one of the wells produced hereby in Canada, I believe they used 8 million liters of fracking fluid and chemicals just to produce one series of wells. So to say that the chemicals are safe, I don't know that yet, and I think that we need to look into it further. When I look at this, I think it's an excellent job. What really jumps out at me is just the general feeling of uncertainty when I look at
And the
this.
science doesn't always agree. There'll be science on the environmental side, science on the industry side, science at the university.
Yeah, well, and I think that when I look at this, what strikes me is it's all about dialogue. And I mean, the title of the show is perfect, Find a Balance. I think we need to continue these kinds of dialogues. And when I look at the graphic representation of the skills gap, I think that there's also probably a knowledge gap. So, there's education from the perspective of making sure that as a society, we are up to date on the facts and the education about it. And then there's also the training aspect, where we need young people coming up to be trained so that they understand this and that they're prepared to work in the industries as they evolve. And I mean, that's from the oil and gas perspective into the clean energy technologies and beyond becomes critical for us.
And Mayor, what's running through your mind?
Actually, I really like what we have in front of us, and what I admire probably the most, other than the dialogue that we had, was find the balance with the Northern Lights and the trees there. And the North really has an opportunity to change the conversation in this province. And when I hear Kevin speak about his knowledge with unconventional resources, and I listen to Tyler saying that we don't know things yet, and so we do need to search that out. And what I see here really moving forward is success. And when we come together and we talk about how to make things better, I really believe that as Canadians we can do that very well.
And Urmi, from a farm perspective?
Just looking at this, there's a lot of things which resonate with me, like especially the water use, and now that the chemicals was always a concern for us living in the rural areas and having wells there and stuff. And I did go on that website and I looked at what the components were. And to be honest with you, as a layman, I don't really understand all of it and what the implications potentially could be for our water sources out in the rural areas.
And as we get more educated and more informed, we make better decisions. That's what success is, right? Well, let's end it on your note, Mayor. Success.
It's, success. And I think we can do it.
Okay. Well, it's been a great discussion today at Northern Lights College. Please join our conversation online, and don't forget to join us for the next Find a Balance. Thanks for watching.